Ja nazywam się Maria Czarnecka i bardzo mi przyjemnie powitać wszystkie osoby zgromadzone dzisiaj na kolejnym, czwartym już webinarze pod tytułem właśnie się pojawiła informacja, że się nagrywamy, więc teraz bardziej oficjalnie. Czwarty webinar pod tytułem Wspieranie ojców, ojcostwo jako połączenie miłości, szacunku, siły i służby. Jest to webinar, który odbywa się w ramach projektu Sztama w edukacji na rzecz zmiany, który jest finansowany i realizowany w ramach programu Aktywni Obywatele, program krajowy, który jest finansowany z Funduszu Europejskiego Obszaru Gospodarczego. Naszym gościem dzisiaj jest dr Charles Daniels, który jest założycielem fundacji Uplift, Fathers Uplift. Więcej o Charlesie opowie albo go podpyta o jego prywatną historię, która skłoniła go do założenia fundacji prowadzące spotkanie, czyli Wojtek Mróz, doradca zarządu Fundacji Ashoka. Bardzo serdecznie witam Was obu. Pięknie tutaj tłumaczy na polski język migowy dla nas pani Diana Kirakowska, a będzie jej towarzyszyć i ją wspierać Barbara Parda. Z języka angielskiego na język polski i odwrotnie wspiera nas cudowny tłumacz Marcin Turski. Z takich kwestii technicznych jeszcze, które chciałabym powiedzieć może dla Państwa i dla Was wszystkich zgromadzonych, jeśli macie jakieś pytania, będziecie mieli jakieś pytania się pojawią w trakcie, proszę, żebyście pisali je na czacie. Będziemy wszystkie pytania zbierać i przekazywać do Wojtka, który będzie je zadawał Charlesowi. Życzę przyjemnej rozmowy i do usłyszenia.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Charles, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and appearing on the webinar. I'm a father, as I know you also a father. I have two daughters, and they are just behind the doors, so I hope that they will not make a lot of noise. Fatherhood is not an easy role, and as I just came to the room and I spoke to my daughters that I need them to care about themselves because I will be here. So it was the moment that they started to be more noisy as usual. So it is opposite. Hopefully it will be not. So fatherhood is not an easy role, as I mentioned, and we will talk about the fatherhood. You run an organization who supports father on many levels. And I would love to hear the story behind the organization and the story behind you, why you co-founded this organization. Could you tell us more about it?
Sure. Thank you for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all, and an honor. So Fathers Uplift was founded based on the assumption that no father holds his child for the first time and dreams of being out of their life, right? Not being engaged, not being of support to his children. And if in fact he's separated from his children, there's a reason, and it is a fundamental part of our process to find out what their reason is based on that assumption. And Fathers Uplift was created simply to provide fathers who are absent or who are on the verge of being absent with the tools and resources to stay engaged. And to be honest with you, I grew up in a household without my father, primarily led by my mother, a single Black woman who worked full time to make sure that I was able to achieve my dreams. But at the same time, I saw the struggles that were connected to her parenting by herself, as well as my father not being in my life. And when I got older, I found out why dad wasn't in my life, and come to find out father was experiencing his own issues that prevented him from being the father that he always wanted to be in my life. So Fathers Uplift was created to think about men like my father, who always wanted to be present, but did not have the community, did not have the resources, did not have the tools to be the fathers they've always dreamed of being. And I'm going to tell you, when my son was born, I have two children. I have a 7-year-old son, his name is Clayton, and I have a daughter named Samaya Grace, who is 1 and is telling us what to do. We already know who's in control, and right now it is Samaya. But when Clayton was on the verge of being born, my mother brought up a baby book, and in that baby book I found a picture as I was flipping through of my father holding me as a baby for the first time. And that picture did two things. First, it confirmed why Fathers Uplift is necessary, why it is important for Fathers Uplift to be present, to be advocating for dads that want to be engaged but don't have the resources to support. But it also confirmed for me, the second point was that my father always wanted to be present. He loved me, and his absence was not my fault, which children automatically blame themselves for things they don't understand. And I really need to see that picture. So Fathers Uplift is pretty much created, I would say, as a generous act of love to support fathers like my own.
Okay, thanks. You mentioned that there are many reasons why fathers are absent in their families and the children. What are the most common reasons? Are there any patterns that you see?
Absolutely. You know, to be honest with you, of course, you know, gentrification in urban communities is real big. So homelessness is a big issue, right? We have a system in America that's called child support, when in fact fathers who are deemed not taking care of their kids with limited evidence are forced to pay these fees to the government, which are in turn used to take care of their children. Oftentimes these fees are outrageous and beyond the father's ability to actually pay. So when you don't pay child support in America, that turns into debt, that turns into unpaid balances, and that puts fathers in a hole. And the government follows suit by taking their license, taking their ability to provide when these forms of payments are not provided, right? So child support is a real big thing. Fathers want to take care of their children, but when they are placed on child support, a lot of their checks are garnished and they're unable to take care of themselves, yet alone their children. So there's also one barrier. We also have relationship issues with the mother. Incarceration is real big, right? Can you imagine? And that's a good portion of our population, fathers who have histories of incarceration and trauma, right? Who have been absent from their kids because they're behind bars, but also because they've experienced traumatic issues, which we work through a lot. And that goes into one of the most, I would say, fundamental barriers that we see is emotional issues, trauma. One of the primary emotions that we deal with at Fathers Uplift are shame, guilt, and embarrassment. As I mentioned before, no father imagines being separated from his kid when the kid is first born and they smell birth and they hold the child for the first time. But you can only imagine the trauma that takes place when a father or any parent is separated from their children. So we deal with those issues, right? How do you pick up the phone when your father, when you haven't seen your kids in 5 years, 10 years? How do you deal with the rejection that you think you're going to experience? And you might very well experience that once you try to re-engage your kids after not seeing them a long time. But it all comes down to shame, guilt, and embarrassment. And of course, the external stuff, but the stuff that's underneath, housing, poverty, incarceration, is definitely emotions. And we deal with a lot of emotions at Fathers Uplift as a mental health and substance use treatment facility. Of course, the substance use is also another barrier.
And for example, violence, is there any connection between violence and because of the, I don't know, some civil workers or police set apart the family because of the violence, and then the father, I don't know, in the future want to change their attitude and go back to the family, but it is not so easy?
So let's talk about that violence piece, which is very important. I'm glad you brought that up, and I definitely wanted to touch bases on it. What we've noticed about the men that we work with at our program is that men treat themselves how they were treated as children, right? So when you think about witnessing domestic violence, or you think about being abused emotionally, typically men are treating themselves the ways in which they were treated as children. So we deal with a lot of harsh behavior towards oneself. And how do you see those behaviors surface? You see them surface in the way that they talk about themselves. I'm not worthy of anything. I'm not important, right? Those are examples of the abuse that they've received when they were children. Someone convinced them that they're not worthy. And we've also noticed that these patterns impact men who are in relationships with women or their partners, right? How so? You're going to treat your partner the way that you treat yourself. right? You're going to treat your children the way that you treat yourself. That's why Fathers Uplift, we focus on self-parenting. We're not teaching men how to parent their children. We're teaching them how to parent that inner child in them. How do you deal with the shame so you're not taking it out on someone else physically and emotionally, right? How do you make sure that you're not abusing women the same way that you may abuse yourself initially, or your children, right? And we recognize that starts with self. So when we deal with and we talk about these emotions, do you know how hard it is for boys in general, young boys, to identify their emotions when they're younger? And one thing about boys is that carries on into their adulthood, until their teenage years, if in fact they're not given the language to communicate how they're feeling and how to self-soothe themselves. And we find ourselves imparting these skills into adults, the men that we work with, who are primarily adults, because they did not get those tools when they were younger, right? So if you don't have the tools to communicate what you're feeling, we will automatically express them outwardly. Violence, right? Violence towards ourselves. And we see those as some effects of not being able to communicate what you're feeling and also parent yourself. It comes out on other people. And we try to avoid that by giving them the context to communicate what they're feeling. And that's why I believe therapy is so important when you're working with men and you're working with fathers and even young boys. We need that language to communicate what we're feeling so it doesn't come out on other people.
Okay, I think that there are a lot of stereotypes about what does it mean to be a man or a boy. And one of them is what you mentioned, that probably it is not good to show your emotions and to have a contact with your emotions, but probably there are many more stereotypes. Can you pick some others and explain? And I'm really curious, are there specific for US or probably they are the same for Poland or other countries?
Absolutely. You know, I can definitely share the ones in the US, which I do believe there's some similarities and differences. But one thing that the United States emphasizes through media, right, through these old sustained norms of what it means to be a man or what a man should be doing, is providing, right? You have to be a provider, right? So think about the man who's unable to provide a house, food for his family. Think about what that does to his emotional well-being, his pride, right? How he views himself. Another one that we see, like you said, strong. You have to be strong. But more importantly, you can't cry. You can't show any emotions, right? We're not necessarily, like, it's not promoted in a positive manner that it's okay for a man to cry, or it's okay for a man to be emotional, right? Or to talk about sadness and what they're feeling. And I can tell you now in America, we're trying to turn the tide slowly but surely, but there's still some stereotypes about men in particular that interferes with their ability to emotionally get to a healthy place, right? But the strong emphasis is definitely on providing. It's also on taking care of everyone else's issues and making sure that if you have a partner and you have children, all their needs are met. Now, your needs are secondary in America. A man's needs are secondary to his family and to those that he cares about and to the things that he's supposed to be doing. For example, in hospitals in America, there is no doctor that is specifically tailored towards supporting the father as he's transitioning into fatherhood. Much of what you are being taught as a man with children entering the world is that you need to take care of the mother. You need to make sure that you do not stress her out. You need to rub her back. And you need to make sure that her feet is massaged, right? Also, you probably could help with breastfeeding, right? You also could make sure that everything is taken care of at the house. But again, there's that emphasis on making sure that mom and the child is okay. There is an emphasis on making sure that you're okay as a man. And we see this in how medical practitioners are being trained, right? There's no curriculum in medical schools in America or psychology schools that teaches you specifically how to work with men who are transitioning into fatherhood. We have an OBGYN, we have nurses, we have doulas, but the emphasis of their work is on the female, right? So as you see in what I'm discussing is that there is a shared similarity between how providers are being taught and how society views the men who are transitioning into these new roles as parents, as caregivers, right? So those are some of the things that we see in America. And I'm pretty sure there's similarities across the board when we look at the research, right? Of course, one of the similarities, you got to make sure the woman's okay. You got to provide. I'm pretty sure we can talk about those and how there's similarities and differences. Now, if we were to add race to this conversation, in America, men in particular, particularly Black and brown men, they're viewed as threats, right? The bigger you are, the darker you are. I mean, there's some old interwoven stereotypes and racist views that really impacts how Black men are treated versus light-skinned men, right? Or Black women, darker women versus lighter-skinned Black women, right? That comes out in how they're treated in the workforce, right? How they're treated in schools, how they're treated in society, right? But again, I think there's a connection between aggression, this thug stereotype, and being Black and brown in America, right? Now, does that come out in how you're treated in the medical field, how you're treated in the space of transitioning to fatherhood? Absolutely, right? I'm currently sitting on a commission for the governor of Massachusetts where we're looking into the racial inequities that impact birthing Black women as opposed to white birthing women in the state of Massachusetts to adopt more practices that can decrease racial inequalities, because it's a real thing in America, right? So those are some similarities and some differences that we see in America.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of similarities in Poland, especially with the providing. And beside the fact that I'm co-directing Ashoka in Poland, I also founded a foundation together with my wife and helping disabled children. And what we see, this is a pattern that I see in Poland. And I have currently hypothesis why it is so based on our conversation, but maybe you can tell me a bit more about it, is that we help the disabled children, and like 80% of those families are the lonely mothers and disabled children, because when the disabled children is born, then the father probably is overwhelmed and don't know what to do, and the easiest way is to escape. And I think in Poland it is different than in US. In Poland, probably most of the cases you should pay something for your children, but if you don't pay, probably nothing is happening. So you don't go to live on the street because you are not paying. So it is easy to just to escape and then to run a new family and then have happy children. And so this is a problem that I see especially, and I'm thinking what could be done just to change the situation. And do you see some kind of this specific situation in your work?
Yeah, you know, it's a long game when working with societies, government structures, when working with men and I think men and families are trying to change the stereotypes and the struggles that they're currently experiencing. But I think it starts with one man and family at a time. And I think it really is embedded in the practices that we use to engage the men and their families, right? You know, are we helping them relearn certain ways to cope with situations? Because at Fathers Uplift, we realize in America that we will not be able to change racism by ourselves, right? We will not be able to change many of the systemic inequities that impact men and their families, especially when it comes to this balance situation, right? But what we can is really be strategic on how we're changing them, and not necessarily how we're changing them, but how we are interacting with them, and the message that our actions, right, is conveying to them about themselves, about who they are, right, but also about their value in the world. And we at Fathers, we believe the greatest impact is embedded in how you treat that man, right? Your engagement with him. We want our engagement at Fathers Uplift to convey to every man that he's important, right? That he's capable of communicating his emotions, that everything isn't solved by violence, right? You can get a lot done in the world with being peaceful, right? We want to convey that the way you treat yourself will be the same way that you treat other people in your life organically, because research shows you that how you treat yourself, how you view yourself will automatically be projected into the world, like it or not, without your control. You can control a little bit, but how you're feeling will automatically come out. So for us, we don't necessarily get caught up in the policies piece, although we try to add our input when necessary. We're trying to make change through our individual interactions with those men that we are privileged to serve. And I believe that the biggest change comes from the individual interactions, right? I think there's only so much you can do with policies. I think, yes, you can create larger change, but people still have to follow the laws. And even if they follow the law and don't follow the law, what's most important is your individual impact. So for us, we believe that change takes place through that lens. And the more people you have treating men differently, conveying these messages to them, showing them, I think the most impact, I would say the long game impact, because I believe that work with men is generational. If you change one man, you change a generation. You know, that's kind of how we look at it, right? So that's the approach that we take to addressing these issues, because there's so much to address. There's so much to address.
Okay, and what I hear from you is one of the specific thing to address is to help to connect those fathers with their emotions and help to regulate probably emotions. So this emotion side. What are the other skills that you think are important in being a good father, or just help those next generations?
Absolutely. I think yes, the conveying of the emotions, but I would say one of the most important components in conjunction with those things, right, is community, right? Parenting is hard. I mean, if we acknowledge that parenting is hard, no one can do it by themselves. Every parent needs someone that they can vent to, right? Because it's going to get tough. Your children are going to get on your nerves at times, right? But do you have that space that you can go and tap into? And one thing that Mrs. Obama, my former first lady, would say about President Obama and her, she says, you know, one thing about women in America is that we have friends. We like to talk. We like to engage in conversation with our friends about anything and everything, right? And she says sometimes you got to tell President Obama, go out there and just get some friends to talk about things, right? And, you know, that's one thing that we're trying to get men more involved in, is just creating community, right? Being a part of a community, understanding that you don't have to be too prideful to be a part of something that's bigger than you. It's okay to reach out for help. In America, that can be hard for men, right? Especially when you're so embedded in the stereotype of having to be all things to all people. If you are embedded in that stereotype and you genuinely believe that, it's going to be hard for you to allow other people to help you. So I think community is very important. I think that's one of the ultimate solutions. I think that has to be a part of any solution when you're working with men, when you're trying to get men to understand, hey, that violence isn't the way, right? But if they have a place to let out their frustrations, to get input, right? To even have someone listening to them, we're creating more solutions, right? We're creating more community for them to be supported, for them to be lifted, and for them to acknowledge that, hey, yes, I don't have to only be all these things to people. Matter of fact, I don't have to be anything to anybody. All I have to do is be present for myself. And in doing so, I will organically impact the people in my life. And that's what we're trying to get men to. We're trying to get them to that place. Because when you're bombarded by so many messages about what you need to be, what you ought to be doing, what you need to have, the white picket fence, the house, the wife, the nice car, the clothes, lots of money, right? You will forget about the true essence of your value and who you are as a man. And that's what we want to get men back to. We're trying to rebuild them. But again, I think the solution here, and one of the most important solutions, is community. Like, it took a village to raise me, right? My mom needed help. And even with my wife and my 2 kids, I need a village. As a CEO of Fathers Uplift, I need a village, right? Every man needs a village, regardless of how successful he is or wherever he is in society. But the hard part is convincing that man that he needs a village. So we try to do both. We do both.
And I have also some questions from our audience, and
yeah.
one is specifically to the topic that you mentioned already. So, how you convince men to join the village, and how you get them to the organization? and encouraged to learn those skills, because probably some of them just say, no, I'm okay.
Yeah. You know, it starts different ways with different men. And to be honest with you, I find that, you know, men may have that village, but they don't know who's a part of that village and how to tap into that village. I think the potential in that village is untapped if they have like aspects of that village. So a part of the solution is identifying the people that's a part of that village and supporting them with tapping into it, asking for help when needed. And when connecting men who don't really have that village or know what that village looks like, I think it takes a grassroots concerted effort to invite those men to the table, areas where we consider to be sacred that they can actually tap into. Now, you don't want to invite them to every area that you consider to be sacred to yourself, but what pieces of your own environment, whether it's functions at your job, or whether it's functions at your community, local church, or a local organization in the neighborhood or in a town that you know that Father is connected to, are there opportunities to connect him to places that are bigger than himself, right? And at Fathers Uplift, that's how we think about it. Yes, we have those men that enter the agency from various structures in society. We get referrals from jails and prisons. We get referrals from community mental health clinics, substance use treatment facilities, even schools. And I can tell you, each man enters the agency at different places in their journey. Some men enter, hey, you know, I want the help, I need the help. And then you have other men say, hey, you know, I want this resource, right? I don't know if I need the help, don't even want to be here, but I need this resource. And regardless of where they enter, you know, we realize that it all starts with customer service and how you treat that person as soon as he walks in that door. And we at Fathers Uplift, we have this saying, you know, a man in general is going to understand what type of organization you are before you even open your mouth. He's going to look at the pictures that you have on your wall. He's going to look at the colors that you have throughout your office, right? He's going to look at these various things that will contribute to the message that he would assume that your organization provides when they're talking about anything that they talk about in society. So for us, we try to make sure that every aspect, from the pictures, from where we're situated, from the colors that we have in our office, from the magazines that we have on our table, shows that Father that he's important. So when he does get to a living, breathing person, that we will automatically align with the things that he's already been introduced to. So surrounding is very important. And from that point, the relationship is what we use to push that person into a community that's bigger than himself. And sometimes that community is him, his assigned clinician, his therapist, his assigned coach, just 3 people at first. But we realize that communities eventually get bigger, the more time and the more trust that is built. And then he allows us to help him in other ways. So I would say, before you open your mouth, there's opportunities to engage a father. And then from that point, it starts with a small group of people before it gets to a larger group of people.
Okay. One of the tools that you use and mention is some kind of form of therapy. And they know that if you're a volunteer, then evidence base is that probably the therapy will work. But if you don't want to get engaged in the therapy, then probably it is the first case that it will not work. So is it the case with your work? How you tell the fathers to convince them that it is really a good to being engaged, not just to be there because somebody forced them to be on the therapy, for example?
Wow, you know, that's a great question. You know, at Fathers Uplift, we're like, you know, we don't care what you call it. You know, we just want you to receive the help. And one thing that we know at Fathers Uplift is that with certain populations, you cannot use the word therapy, right?
Exactly. So in Poland. So in Poland, you go to therapy, then something is wrong with your psyche, and probably you won't tell anybody that you do. So, and it will be like the last step that you want to do.
So that's one of the actual similarities at Fathers Uplift, because there's certain communities where you can't use the word therapy, and at Fathers Uplift, we're assessing that as soon as you come in the door. So whether we call it wellness check-in, whether we call it a uplift visit, we pivot based on the culture of that person. And we don't mind pivoting. You know, at Fathers Uplift, we know that everything that we do is therapeutic in some way, form, or fashion, regardless of what the word needs to be used. And we don't get caught up in semantics. That's another thing too. I believe that language is very important, and to understand the words that you're using to tap into a particular group of people is integral to you being able to serve effectively. So we don't get into the fights, oh, therapy, wellness, uplift visit. Okay, whatever works for you, whatever you're comfortable with, we're going to call it that. So if I know a young man's coming to the office who doesn't like the word therapy, I'm saying, hey, you know, come get your wellness check-in. What would happen if you had a broken leg? We say, I would go to the doctor. Okay, well, sometimes you got to do that for your internal wellness. You got to go and talk to someone. So come and get your wellness check-in. So we pivot a lot, right? We also have a program at Fathers Uplift that we started recently, which is very cool. And I found it to be very beneficial because we wasn't always thinking about the work from this angle. So this program's new. It's called our Ambassador Program, where there's former clients at Fathers Uplift who go on to be trained to become ambassadors. Now, they're not therapists. They're not coaches. They're essentially advocates. And what they do is work with,
right?
Yeah. And they work with men in our community, the men who may not want to be enrolled in the full comprehensive services of Fathers Uplift, but they need help. So our ambassadors are working with those men and providing the advocacy, standing in solidarity with them, going places with them, introducing them to people. So they're creating community and providing care without us even having to touch them. And I believe like models like that, the peer-to-peer models, mentorship models for older men is just as important as it is for models for boys. And in America, there's an emphasis on providing mentorship to younger boys. I think I would say there's this assumption that the older you get, the more of a lost cause you become. We don't believe that at Fathers Uplift. I mean, there's a lot of organizations in America that don't believe that, but it is an inherited assumption that we have to acknowledge and say it is what it is, right? But those are some things that we're doing at Fathers Uplift that works. We changed language, and we have now a community program of former clients who are giving back to their community. And we paid them a stipend, a handsome stipend to serve. And they found it very, very supportive and rewarding to contribute and give back what they've been received.
Great. Could you tell us some particular example for the whole journey from, for example, for the beginning and then to becoming, for example, a success and then becoming an ambassador? You told us that this is a long way. So yeah, I want to imagine, is it like a half of a year or is it more like a 5 years journey, for example?
So there's another thing too. That's a great question. We don't believe in discharging or kicking people out of the program, right? We believe that fathers, men need lifelong supports. So we're essentially becoming that community that we believe that everyone needs. So what does that mean? A father can stay in the program as long as he wants. He can be 6 months, he gets his needs met, and it could be 10 years. And we have fathers who've been with us since we've been around, 10 plus years, right? But what we find with men in particular, that it's very need-based, right? So much of our men know that, hey, they're gonna get their needs met and they may disconnect, but they always can come back. So we've always see that cycle. You may be active for a full 6 months to an entire year, more active, like every day, every other day. Once you get your needs met, we notice that you might distance yourself, but when another need surfaces, you know where to call, you know where to go. And a lot of our men cycle in and out like that for as long as they need to, until they get their needs met on an ongoing basis. And we're fine with that. We were designed to be like a community clinic for men in need. So we like get your needs met, detach and come back. You know, we don't have a cutoff. And I think that's one of the things that make us different, right? There's a huge emphasis for men, fathers in America on curriculums. You know, hey, you complete your 12 to 14 week group, you get your certificate and you're done. At Fathers Uplift, you come for 12 weeks. If you want to be done, you always can come back. And you can come back for 12 weeks, you always can come back. And that's one thing that we want to be a revolving door for those men.
Okay, I have one question from our audience. So if some father goes to the to Fathers Uplift, then we understand what will happen then next. And there are many ways from which they can come, but probably not all of them come. Some of them thinks that those stereotypes that men means that you provide, you need to help yourself. So it's not a good thing to do to go to Fathers Uplift. So what with them? How you encourage those, and how you find those? So probably from business point of view, how you promote or market your organization to your personas. So those fathers who don't want to engage.
Yeah, you know, we don't really pay for marketing. It's not really a line item on our budget, right? Our greatest marketers are the men who benefited from the work. And we believe that men that are a part of the community are your greatest resource when spreading the word about you. So typically, the majority of our referrals come from men who've been impacted, who go back and tell other men about the services that we provide. And it all starts with an issue. I'm not able to see my kids. I don't know what to do. And those men who've been impacted, tell them, hey, go down to Fathers Uplift. We also have organizations telling men, hey, you know, I know you're experiencing this issue. Go down to Fathers Uplift. They can help you. You know, we're unique in terms of the work that we do. So everyone knows what we do and how we do it. So typically people that are sent to us, they have some type of issue that is interfering with their ability to be a part of their kid's life, right? And, you know, the beliefs about providing, not providing, you know, whatever you may believe, or you may believe some of those things that society holds true and dear to them, like 110%, there's no wiggle room. It all comes down to, am I able to see my kid or not? And I could say that some of those men who have like those strong conservative values, they prioritize seeing their kids over the semantics and the value fighting, right? So we find that the kid is the largest motivation here, right? So typically we don't get into those fights or those disagreements culturally. And, you know, if there was something that they really believe that our principles and our organization doesn't align with, we prioritize the kid, right? So that's one thing that we haven't really had an issue with, is promoting.
Yeah, so the best model is that in business, that if you don't need to market your services, then it means that you're on the right market.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Really great. I have other question regarding nonviolent parenting. I work in a specific way in the context of teach how to have a nonviolent parenting.
Yeah, you know, so we're real big with narrative therapy, narratives. We're real big with solution focus. There's a model that I created called pre-father care, which really takes fathers through that preliminary developmental journey about what did they learn about fathering from their past, the aspects of fathering that they want to bring into their relationship with their children or continue, and the aspects of fathering that they do not want to continue, that they want to discontinue. And we really dissect those things. See, we're starting from scratch. What society told you you need to be, right? What you learned from your own parents, and what do you want to be? So with pre-father care, we go through this entire process of understanding how what you believe about being a man in society was developed, but also how can you take what you like and what you dislike and create a new path, right? So those are some of the models that we use, but I can tell you that one thing that we do not take for granted is the father's expertise. And with that being said, we enter the work as partners in that regard, right? So with those models, we found that breaking down and really understanding the historical origin of that father's development as a man and father in America, it allows us to partner with him in creating a new narrative of what he wants to be and practicing those things. And in doing so, you're tackling a lot of those violent practices. I can tell you the majority of the men that we work with behind bars, much of our work takes place with men behind bars. A lot of our clients have histories of incarceration and trauma, right? Over the last 3 years, we had a 4% recidivism rate where men who come out, they don't go back in, you know, they probably cycle in and out, but then they stay out for good, right? Why is that? As we're dissecting and breaking down and understanding psychologically how that dad got to the point where he is now, we can tackle a lot of those violent practices by showing him where it came from. We find that many of our men in our program who engage in some of these violent practices, they don't know where it came from. It's all a disillusion, right? It's like blur. So for us, we got to really put out on the table. Okay, you do this because of this. Do you see how this connects? Now, is it something that you want to leave a legacy for your kids to continue to adapt? I don't believe, and you do have those therapists out there who believe that, hey, like your CBT, your cognitive behavioral therapy experts, you got those people out there who believe, hey, the best solution is to focus on the present. They don't care nothing about the past. At Fathers Uplift, we don't believe that. We believe that the past opens doors for the future. So we're digging into the weeds of the past unapologetically. But again, everybody don't believe that in America. But we believe that. How else, my assumption, how else can we prepare men for the future if they don't know how they've been impacted by their past? How can we encourage men not to be violent if they don't understand the impact of what their past taught them about being violent? So we go through that process. So for us, that process is mandatory. If you're going to be a partner at Fathers Uplift, we want to talk about the past. We want to understand the past. Because like we tell all of our men, there's beauty in the past. And if you can understand the beauty in the past, you can deal with the violence behavior. And typically what you will see, what we see as the factor of change when men go through our process and we know that they change, we see that they become less violent, less negative to themselves. For us, that's the indicator of success. How you treat yourself is a primary indicator of success. And that's what we measure at Fathers Uplift.
Okay, so as I understand, first of all, you think about the past, then you try to fix how you think that past influence the present moment. So, and you teach how to be better for yourself, but the ultimate goal is to build a relationship, probably not only with yourself, but with your child. And then is your role also to empower the relationship between children and fathers? Do you work with children also, or only with fathers?
So let me just put it out there frankly. You know, when we work with men who enter our office with the histories that they have, right? The child is secondary. The primary child that we're going to be focusing on is their inner child. That's the first child you have to learn how to parent before you can be a better father or a father to your child, your physical child, right? We believe that every father has an inner child. Every parent has an inner child. And how you interact with that child will determine how you interact with other people. That inner child is you, right? What makes their inner child angry? What tips their inner child off? What triggers their inner child? You know, their inner child. My inner child's name is CJ. So I had to get CJ under control before I could be a father to Clayton and Samaya, my children, right? So we take that approach when we're working with these men. We're going to talk about how much you love your children, how much you miss your children, begin in a slow manner to getting you back in their lives. But you have to go through the process of dealing with your child first before you can deal with your child physically. And for us, that's an ongoing process, and it really starts there, right? I don't believe I answered the other portion of your question. What was the second piece of that?
The other was that I understand the way you teach how to work with your inner child. Yeah. Then do you work with the children? I give you an example. We have other Ashoka Fellow in Poland, Darek Cupiał, who is organizing groups of fathers. So they meet every month, for example, a circle of 10, 15 fathers in every city in Poland. And also what they do, apart from education, how to be a good father, they organize, for example, trips, fathers with their children, adventures with them. So they organize and show how you can spend time with your children in a very valuable way. So my question was, do you have this aspect in your organization, or maybe not because of some fact, or maybe you plan to do it in the future? I don't know.
Yeah, so, you know, the parent-child time is important for us, and we do have those things, but we want to make sure that the father is able to get to this certain point of emotional maturity and an increased capacity to self-parent. Like I mentioned previously, many of our fathers are separated from their children for a reason, whether it's mistreatment, whether the reason is legitimate, and or we have lots of cases where the reason is illegitimate, right, of no fault to their own. But still, that process of self-parenting is important. Let me tell you why. We've had cases, right, prior to really focusing on the emotional early on in our origin, prior to really focusing on this emotional attunement and parenting, we've had cases where fathers who had been separated from their kids would stop fighting to be engaged in their kids' lives because of how hard it was. And typically, they blamed themselves for not being a part of their kids' lives, and they also thought that their children would be better off without them. Now, there's a psychological assumption there that's going on, that's taking place in that father's mind. He wants to be present, but he doesn't believe in his capacity to actually re-engage in his kid's life. Now, we realize as we've grown that we have to pay a lot of attention to that whole internal psychological dynamic and get the father to a place where he isn't afraid of rejection, but also understand that rejection is a byproduct of the person's being hurt, not necessarily of them being an issue or a horrible person. So putting things into context and how you view things is very important. But again, if you don't really understand the nature of your inner child, the way in which you perceive things will continue to be flawed, disoriented, right? It would be premature, it would be unhealthy. So much of our work, yes, we do focus on outings with the fathers at times, right? But for us, there's a building point to get to that particular issue. And for our population, majority of them, they're not with their kids. So we're doing a lot of advocacy. We're working on the time of the government, right? So typically a lot of our men that we work with have open cases with child welfare. Perhaps the mother did something or their kids were removed away from them for a variety of reasons. They haven't seen their kids in years. Or another situation, the mother and father are not on good terms and the mother isn't allowing the father to see the child. Right?
Yeah,
in America, when a child is born, the mother has full rights. But typically, if the mother wanted to leave a particular state and go to another state, the father could call the police, but they won't do anything because the mother has those rights. Right? So we're dealing with a very maternal focus and favorited particular part of the state that we are. They call Massachusetts Massachusetts for a reason. Much of the laws go towards the mother. So we're dealing with a lot of that before the father even has the opportunity to physically engage in his kid's life. But we don't want him to give up altogether. So that's why that reframing, reshifting takes place in the process.
Okay. And is there any way you help to communicate between fathers and mothers? You mentioned that some of the cases is that mother is not allowing to contact child with his father. So maybe if you are in between, then you can help to mediate, for example.
Absolutely. And that takes a lot of time, right? That takes a lot of time. You know, you're talking about, there's a term in research in the United States of America, and that's starting to be used widely. It's called maternal gatekeeping. Now, in cases where mothers aren't allowing fathers to see their children, right? It isn't because they're bad people or they're horrible mothers, right? It's because somewhere down the line, trust was broken, right? So when you're not allowing the father to see the child, in most cases, it's because you're afraid the father is going to hurt the child, right? I.e., he's going to leave, right? He's not going to be consistent in the child's life. He's going to get arrested again. These are legitimate concerns that many of the mothers that we work with actually have. So we do have clinicians that are women on our staff who are prepared to have these conversations with the mothers. We found that when it comes to these conversations, women are better positioned to actually have these conversations with other women who are considering allowing the father back into his child life or not considering it, right? Having a woman involved is extremely important. So we don't believe that fatherhood work or any work related to regarding men can be done without women. It can't be, right? We need women. We have to partner with the women, our mothers, to actually do right by the men and the family in our country. So,
and we spoke about mothers, we spoke about children, fathers. Are there any ecosystem players that needs to be in the village so that the fatherhood will be okay in the future?
Well, you know, I think domestic violence advocates should be involved in the picture. Now, I think fatherhood practitioners, individuals working with fathers, working with men, the whole ecosystem could be a great asset to those practitioners, right? Because I think typically what we see in America is that men are typically identified as the perpetrators often, all the time, right? But there are cases where men are the victims, not the perpetrators. And I think when you get caught up in this narrative of men being the only perpetrators, it's hard to really assess thoroughly when men are not the perpetrators. And I think the ecosystem could benefit from DV advocates being involved, but I think also the village, individuals working with men and their families could also benefit DV advocates, domestic violence advocates as well, by showing the plethora of cases and the variety when it comes to individuals impacted by domestic violence. And not saying that women are definitely disproportionately impacted by domestic violence. But we can't forget about those cases of men that are impacted too, right? So I think we need everyone at the table to figure out how can we really assess these situations thoroughly, right? Now, they're being assessed thoroughly to an extent, but we can't forget about those men that are equally impacted. So I think they need to be at the table. I also think that we need to get universities at the table as well, right? Especially when looking at the issues or circumstances that impact men, fathers, as they are entering fatherhood, right? We need to get public health experts to the table as well, right? We gotta start training our practitioners and our doctors, our future psychologists on how to work with men, right? How to be better supports to them, right? We gotta have more material embedded in their curriculums, right? Currently, there is a public health certification degree for maternal health future experts, but there's nothing for paternal health. Why is that? We need to create a paternal health certification, right? We need to have more paternal health centered curriculums. I think it's equally important, and we cannot do that without universities. We need to have health insurance experts at the table, health experts. I know in America, health insurance is real big. When you look at certain fee service sheets, there's a lot of services that are reimbursable for mothers to receive care throughout the pregnancy. There aren't hardly any for men that are engaging in pregnancy. I tell my wife all the time, I said, babe, you were physically pregnant, but I was emotionally pregnant, right? I was going through this whole emotional process that was extremely challenging and stressful. And I did not have a doctor that really understood my issues, and it was studied, right? Studied across the board. So I think we need more researchers to be at the table. So those are some people that I think need to be a part of the ecosystem. And also, you need more mothers at the table. You need more fathers at the table. And I think we should also hear from our children. Right? I think our children are old enough to be at the table.
You mentioned about the universities. I have one idea in my mind I want to share regarding the fathers that probably don't want to engage in your organization. But probably if the child will ask the father that maybe, I don't know, let's just have a particular name like Michael is the father. And for example, I ask Michael, my father, to engage in Fathers Uplift, then probably the percentage chances that he will come to the first health check with Fathers Uplift is getting higher and higher. So I can imagine that some of the way that you can tell about the organization is also in, I don't know, schools, when you can meet with young children or youth, and then they can, for example, ask how they can, for example, speak with their fathers and ask them maybe to engage, because at the same time father needs and want to have a connection with children, and at the same time probably the children needs and wants to have a connection with the fathers and are looking for different ideas how to do it.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea, and I love it. I think it goes to, in America, we have a shortage of people of color that enter the human service field, particularly trained therapists, licensed therapists. There's a shortage of Black and brown therapists in the field. I think also training our youth to consider therapy and consider working with men as a future career. I think lawyers do a great job with getting future lawyers. I don't think therapists, we do a great job at that. So, but I think those two things could definitely work hand in hand. Great idea. I love it.
Yeah, and I imagine you mentioned it's a long-term game. So from one hand, you can have ambassadors on the father side, but then you can have also ambassadors on the children's side, probably.
Yes. I love that. Look at you. Absolutely. We didn't think about that.
Charles, we have so many questions from participants that I'm not able to ask them. Probably I can ask from my side like one or two more, and then I will read all of them to make sure that all are answered.
And if we don't get to them, you can send them and I can answer them and send it back to you if you don't mind too. So I don't mind doing that.
Okay, so what interests me is some numbers, meaning how many fathers currently you are helping, and how you want to develop your organization, and is your aim to work only in the US, or maybe in future you also want to work in different countries?
Yeah, so in a given year, we touch over 3,000 fathers and families, right? On a consistent basis, that's over 1,000 fathers and families in our system that we see who are connected to us. We're also touching our fathers through our podcast. We have a podcast called Absent for a Reason, which, like you said, it goes to your point earlier with men who don't necessarily want to go to therapy or who are not considering it. We've added content to our podcast to engage them in that manner. We have a listenership of over 1,000 people, right? So that tells you right that we're really trying to think about innovative ways to introduce therapy to our population without necessarily calling it therapy all the time. Now it's therapy, right? You're getting that material, but you're getting it in a way that you would be willing to accept it. So that's one way. We definitely have plans to go international.
I have a question from Michael, and he's asking how to become fatherhood uplifter in Poland.
Yes, I love that. I'm open to it. Let's do it. You know, we just manualized our program. We have our curriculums out now. We're trying to get partners on board to do the curriculum with the fathers in their respective places. So I would love that.
Yeah, well, the one reason why I switched from because I used to work in business. I was entrepreneur, and then 2 or 3 years ago I switched the site and start to support social entrepreneurs. And the difference is that in business you want to have a lot of patents, and so that nobody will copy you or do what you do. And social entrepreneurs measure their success based on the number of people, organizations that they copy or do the same, so that the problem will not exist anymore. So probably Michael, we will help to connect you with Charles, and maybe the first country outside of US will be Poland.
Yes, listen, I'm ready. We would love to. We want to be international. You know, that's my goal as a social entrepreneur, is to touch as many fathers that we possibly can touch. And we're definitely open to feedback, advice. We just want to serve. So thank you.
Okay. If I could wish you something, like to what you can do in like a 5 years period, what would it be?
You know, my goal in 5 years would be to have an international presence, serving fathers and families, and have partners all over the place that are utilizing our materials. That's what I want. That's where we want to be in 5 years. You know, also, you know, another goal would be is for everyone that's connected to us to feel like they are the best fathers that they've always dreamed of being. You know, I know those are small goals, or they seem small, but I believe we definitely have a major impact, and it would be great to have partners all over the world engaging in that impact. So that's my wish for 5 years, and hopefully we can get there.
So this is what I wish you, and I think it will happen probably. I really see the need of good fatherhood around myself. So there are many of my friends who are fathers, and I'm lucky because I'm lucky because I have a huge village around myself, and we met every month with a group of fathers, and we tell about our emotions, and we tell what we can do together with our children, etc., etc. And I see how beneficial it is for myself, for the children, and I wish that every father can experience such beautiful feelings, and the children are wonderful. Okay, we can skip to the questions from audience. I will read it from the end till the beginning. If I will miss some question, Maria or Asha, please let me know. So the last one is, based on the experience of the organization, what would you put in the educational curriculum to tackle the problems you are talking about? What should we teach boys and girls?
Absolutely. So with the girls piece, that's a great question. You know, I'm still trying to figure that out. I have a daughter now. So she's teaching me more than I could teach her, but hopefully I got a lot learning about what we can teach girls, but I definitely think we can teach them how to be valuable without feeling as if they need someone's validation to be valued. With our men in particular, I would teach them everything that we're teaching the fathers in our curriculum, right? How to love yourself, how to love others, right? How to pour into yourself, how to identify your emotions. I also think these are things that our girls can learn too, right? But from a foundational standpoint, I would start there.
Okay. Other question is, I believe that we, to some extent, we answer it, but maybe I will tell it once again. How does your work relate to tackling the root cause of the problem, which is patriarchal capitalism as a system that we live in?
You know, so our goal is to dismantle that system, the thinking that's connected to that system, and allow men to contribute to their thinking, what makes them feel like a man, a father, right? But also be aware of any harmful masculine beliefs that could interfere with their development, but also the safety of themselves and their loved ones. So at Fathers Uplift, like I talked about in the past, we got to break it down to understand it and rebuild. And I think those are important conversations to have about the past.
Okay. And the other question is, how high is the percentage of your clients who struggle with different type of trauma? Being abused in the childhood, minority stress, poverty, etc. You have some figures?
Oh my gosh, right? 99%, right? One thing about our work, right, is that everyone enters with some type of trauma, and they also enter with some type of barrier that they're experiencing. We have a lot of food insecurity, right? We have a lot of homelessness, housing issues, and we have a lot of substance use. And it's not only just one issue, it typically is multiple issues at once. So you're not just dealing with homelessness, you're probably dealing with homelessness, substance use, child support. So there's always multiple issues that they enter our agency with, but the majority of them experience some type of trauma and external stressors mentioned previously.
Okay, I think I asked all the questions that I have in my chat. If not, please tell me, Asha or Maria. And Charles, is there any important question you think I should ask and I didn't?
Wow, I think you were very thorough. You know, I don't really have any, but thank you. Thank you.
You mentioned about the podcast. Maybe you can send us the information about the podcast, and if you think it could be beneficial, for example, for the fathers in Poland, assuming that
Absolutely.
probably we are human as well, and probably the same emotional stresses and things are among us.
Yes, and I also have a new book out too, where we're putting a lot of, what I think about therapy into a book, but it's a light way of making sure that therapy is more accessible. It's called Therapy for Kings.
Therapy for Kings.
Therapy for Kings, and you'll see my the way in which I think about therapy and why I believe it's beneficial in that book. And it's just normalizing it and having conversations with men. So feel free to check that out. We are creating a push for it now as we speak, but look out for that. And you can find it on any platform, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, anywhere. So.
Okay. You mentioned a lot about therapy. Semantically, you can call it differently. Is it the first approach that you started in Fathers Uplift, or was it a journey and then in some time you thought this is the best way? There is a lot about emotions, etc. When I spoke with Darek, other Ashoka Fellow from Poland, he's not telling so much about emotion and inner child. He's more working with the connection between child and father. I think that knowing him and now knowing you, the both ways are very beneficial and should work together. Yeah.
It came from a case study of my life.
And it was your background, your psychology?
Yeah, so background is in clinical social work and urban leadership. And, it came from my personal background. I could not come up with any reason why my father was absent outside of him not really being able to self-soothe himself emotionally or love himself emotionally, right? When I found that picture of him holding me for the first time, I mean, you held your child for the first time when they were born. Like, can you possibly imagine living a life without them? I don't think no father can. So it has to be your capacity to emotionally love yourself or communicate what you're experiencing. Deal with shame, guilt, and embarrassment. That's the only issue that could serve as a barrier. So I set my eyes on that when I studied clinical social work and therapy to understand how can we get men more used to communicating what they're feeling and dealing with the tough emotions. So that's how I laid my eyes on that. But it came through my personal experience and really reevaluating my life and the life of my amazing father.
Okay. Well, it was really a pleasure for me to talk with you. Really, just if we would talk like 30 or 60 minutes more, probably I will be a second volunteer to the Fathers Uplift in Poland. I believe that the kind of work that you do, especially regarding your emotion, is something that every person, not only fathers that live apart from their children, but also the fathers that live with their children, also the mothers, etc. Everybody should work, and having a good connection with the inner child is one of the solutions that we can improve the whole society and the world. This is what I believe. I also started to study psychology with my wife 2 years ago. So it was a pleasure to talk with you. If there is any last question from the audience, please feel free to ask. We for sure will share the links to the podcast, to the book of Charles, to the organization. And if somebody is especially interested in supporting the organization, just feel free to contact. And as Charles mentioned, in 5 years, it will be international organization. Maybe it will be the next year. So we are waiting for volunteers.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Maria, Asha, would you like to?
Yes, thank you so much, Charles, for the very interesting and inspiring conversation. Thank you so much, Wojtek. Now, forgive me, I will switch to Polish. Bardzo dziękuję za dzisiejszy webinar. Myślę, że jak dla mnie, tak i dla Was wszystkich był bardzo ciekawy i inspirujący. Miejmy nadzieję, że rzeczywiście być może po pierwszym i drugim potencjalnym wolontariuszu Fathers Uplift się pojawi w Polsce. Chciałabym podziękować Fundacji Ashoka za współorganizację tego wydarzenia i tak tego i pozostałych 3 webinarów i jeszcze jednego, który przed nami jest. Ogromnie też dziękuję Fundacji Regeneracji za wsparcie techniczne i organizacyjne, a za promocyjne Fundacji Dajemy Dzieciom Siłę i Mąka. Dziękuję naszym wspaniałym tłumaczkom i z polskiego języka migowego i naszemu tłumaczowi z języka angielskiego i na język polski. To chyba by było na tyle. Bardzo dziękuję i niedługo się widzimy na kolejnym webinarze Sztamy.